assistant administrator within the P3 division. He's got a 21-year GDOT employee career and a licensed professional in Georgia. He began his career in the Office of Urban Design and held numerous positions in the department, including State Pre-Construction Utility Engineer and P3 Construction Program Manager. Mr. Hoenig obtained his Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology in 2003. So, without further, we'll save the questions until the end of all three. Please.
We say the Institute.
Don't know if that's, there we go.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, and welcome everybody to the first session after lunch. I'll try and keep the energy up level, not as good as that as I am Purcell was, but I'll do my best to keep everybody awake here. So I presented 8 years ago was the last time I was at ITE, so I jumped at the opportunity to present again. But at that presentation, I talked mostly about the Major Mobility Investment Program, and there seems to be a lot of feedback. Is that bad for y'all or just bad for me? Okay, thank you. So Major Mobility Investment Program was 2016, and since that time, we've actually been able to award 9 contracts to contractors, and really 2 more will be by the end of this year. So we've delivered on 11 of those commitments already out of the original 13, and actually 6 are already open to traffic. So we're well on our way to delivering all of the Major Mobility Investment Program. But really, so it's time to start looking about what we have coming up after that, right? About after Major Mobility. We obviously have Top End still to go, which is a huge project, don't get me wrong, but it is time to start looking at, what's next and what's coming after that. So that's what I'm going to talk to you guys about a little bit today. Again, what we have coming in the alternative delivery and where we are now. We just did a little bit of So again, I don't want to talk about where we're going before talking about where we've been. It is really exciting how much we've been able to do via design build and via alternative delivery. So 55 design build projects totaling more than $2 billion is a really great achievement. Our commissioner actually gave a presentation to the board last week, and in part of that presentation, he mentioned that Illinois DOT just recently passed design build legislation. So it's crazy to think that some other state DOTs haven't even done their first design build project, let alone CMGC or design build finance. We've been doing design build since 2008 was the first project we did via design build. That was the key to interchange. And so 16 years of history delivering DB and 2 billion projects. That 2 billion in dollar figures does not include design build finance. So it does not include the 285-400 project or the Northwest Corridor project. So really you could say it's even more than that $2 billion figure by now. And then in 2024, just this year alone, we're expected to award about $5 billion of P3 division projects. We have the West Interchange project coming out, which is 285 and 20 on the west end. That's a huge project that'll get selected in August. And then the 400 Express Lanes project also to be selected in August. So those obviously make up a majority of that $5 billion. We also have 316 bundle projects coming. Those are design build about $100 million each. So this is probably our biggest fiscal year to date of delivering alternative delivery projects. So we're really excited with the present and what we have delivering right now. Again, talking about right now, 20 projects currently approved and in various stages of pre-let development. Those in the future slides. And then in the coming decade, P3 division is expected to deliver more than $20 billion in alternative delivery projects. That's just really exciting to see that number. Again, a lot of that has to do with the Top End project, which is a behemoth of a project. But even taking that aside, we still have a lot of other alternative delivery projects to be delivered. So I get this question a lot about what is coming, what types of alternative delivery projects are coming down the pipe. So really, these are the types of projects we've delivered in the past. And in Georgia, we really do design build for all variety of sizes and types of projects. We've done a maintenance project on I-20 for lighting. That was about $1 million of lighting project. And then we've done Safe Routes to Schools projects via design build. So you take that as kind of the small scale. And then we've gone all the way up, of course, to design build finance projects. I think the niche or the projects that are most well fit for design build is the interchange improvement projects. Those are $100 million where you have interstate or limited access facilities, bridges over the interstates or ramps, things that really benefit from more innovation. The interstate widening project has been really successful to do design build on. The first one was the Forsyth County project where they passed a referendum for $200 million. And we were able to use 63 of that to deliver 13 miles of widening on 400. So since that was a really big success, we actually did a variable scope on that project where we had a set dollar figure. And we told the contractors to go as far as you can, get as much widen, and we were able to widen 13 miles with that 63 million. So since that time, we've done a lot of other interstate widening projects. The I-85 is a really good example, I-85 phase 1, 2, and 3 via design build. So Ms. Purcell talked about the $1.5 billion of funding that we just got via the governor's office. So that's in addition to our transportation budget. So that's really exciting for the DOT to be able to use some of that money. There's a list of projects which I could send you if you ask me after the session. It is a public list about which projects are included in that, and included in that list is the I-16 widening, which is very needed, basically from I-95 to almost as far as you can go towards the west, towards Macon. That is such needed, like she touched on with the freight involvement coming out of the Ports Authority. That'll be a huge project with all that development. There's some other projects on there that might be design build, but that one is probably one we're really looking at doing design build for. Some other types of projects we've done is Economic Development Authority projects or economic development opportunities. She touched on the Hyundai plant, and she did not touch on, because it's not in her district, but we also did a Rivian development in District 2. Again, those are projects where we can get out infrastructure in advance of the economic development coming in. And then certainly for this audience, maybe the most applicable or most exciting is the ITS projects we've done via design build. So that's the weigh in motion and the variable speed limits projects. And then we've done more recently, we've done dynamic message sign projects, where those are in advance of like toll facilities. The first time we did that was we delivered 5 DMS projects in one design build contract in in Cobb County and in Chatham County to get the word out again in advance of the Northwest Corridor for 75. So we are looking at doing some other DMS projects too. We just awarded our second bundle with 3 signs, and so that'll be constructed here shortly. And then special projects, Georgia NEVI that Christina is going to talk about in her presentation. We delivered in a design build procurement, but then we turn it over to the TMC to operate and to work with the selected contractor to deliver that project, those types of projects. I wanted to talk about this project specifically, the ITS and CV implementation. So this was a system that we were rolling out to get fiber along the interstates in more rural Georgia areas to, for example, if Florida evacuations are coming through 75 and we wanted to see what's going on. We didn't have much visibility on the interstate system. So we were able to install, right now we're able to select a contractor to install fiber along I-75. That was awarded last year to Brooksbury Haney. And then the green was just more recently awarded to Jacobs. So that's I-16 coming out this way. And then we do intend on getting fiber on all of the interstates going forward. So not only do we see the ability to see what's going on the interstates, but then get the message out too via DMS signs so the drivers can tell the road conditions ahead of them. So again, expanding the miles of network infrastructure along the interstates. Really excited to have all the systems covered by Navigator and fiber. So those are the types of projects that we've worked on. I do want to talk about the kind of delivery models that we've used and new news in that realm. So we've had the yellow column, the Design Build Authority, for a while, again, for 16 years, I think, is when that legislation initially passed. We do make changes, though, to the legislation, and we update where we are and what we're allowed to do. So initially, the industry was more comfortable with low bid environment. That's what they'd always done. But then more recently, we've been able to do best value projects. And that's really seen a benefit in terms of like schedule or aesthetics or working with local communities. There's lots of other ways to get value out of a project besides low bid. But the more recent legislation we got approved was the alternative contracting method, the ACM projects, and that was split into 3 categories: CMGC, Preliminary Development Agreement, and Comprehensive Development Agreement. Has everybody heard of CMGC? Do you know what that is? I don't need to explain. Okay, good. I got a bunch of head nods, so I'll assume yes. So we did award our first CMGC project, though. Real excited that, again, Ms. Purcell talked about the raising of the Talmadge Bridge in Savannah. That's going really well, really well. It's really cool to see the coordination between the consultant and the contractor working together with a common solution before you even have a construction bid authorized, but those entities working together come up with the best solution. So one thing I do want to be clear on, ACM legislation is is very limited in Georgia. Right now, it's 7 projects over a 10-year time frame. So we don't anticipate using ACM for too many projects, but it is a tool in the toolbox when you have a complicated situation like raising the Talmadge Bridge that had never been done before. It's a good opportunity to use CMGC. And then public-private partnerships, we've been doing for a little while too, design, build, finance, maintain, and operate, maintain. We also have OMC, operate, maintain, and commercialize that, when we're installing those fibers, we're going to come back later with an OMC project that we're working on with TMC to be able to commercialize the fiber that we've installed via design, build previously. So that's a real exciting opportunity as well. So I wanted to show you the new reorganization. I've gotten the questions today about what our changes are, because I used to be in the construction side of things. I've been now moved to, well, I shouldn't say it that way. I have moved to the pre-let side of things. So I'm the pre-let assistant administrator. Real excited with an opportunity to be back on the pre-let side of things. But besides what I've been doing, or where I am now, it's really a growth of our division. For example, Kelvin Mullins is now the District 1 engineer. I see Jason Dykes was in the room, so because Kelvin came to our division. But on top of Kelvin, we also have Helen Pinkston Pope. She was in GDOT Legal, and we coordinate with her a lot. She was kind of our #1 SME in legal office. Now she's in our division. And then also similarly with Michelle Pate, she was in design policy and support, and she's now been brought over to our division. We're really growing our division, and this is intentional to get more GDOT engaged leadership on these projects. I'll highlight the post-let side of things because Kelvin is also hiring more project managers to work in the post-let side of things to really grow that engaged GDOT engagement and leadership on the post-let environment. We had gotten to the point where we couldn't manage all the projects on with the small amount of people we had, so really growing the division and being more focused on projects. And then Chandri Brown is also joining our division. She was in program delivery, Office of Program Delivery, so now she's my counterpart in the pre-let side of things. And the other thing I wanted to touch on today, did everybody know, I want to show hands, did everybody know that we did a design build finance survey? I know some, one. Ah, man, that's too bad. Oh, 2, thank you. And yeah, I know you guys, I work with all of y'all. That's good. But we did do a design build finance survey very recently. I think it went out in April. Well, the deadline was June. So really trying to get feedback from the industry about what we're doing right and how we can be more efficient maybe. So we sent that out through ACEC and through Georgia Highway Contractors Industry and got a lot of great feedback. But it was really, we really do value the feedback we receive from the industry. If you ever have anything that is not going well on a design build finance or a design build project, feel free to reach out. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the survey results we got because it is good feedback. We received 40 individual responses from the industry. Again, all varied from consultants and contractors, varied in terms of experienced and non-experienced. And I was pretty happy with the 40, but I was really happy with that's the number of people that responded, not the responses themselves, so they varied all over the place. So they were focused on sort of 6 areas that I'll touch on: streamline, procurement, approach, and evaluation criteria. I touched on the best value selection criteria, but it was really good to see the industry has really grown in Georgia, grown from, again, low bid approach to best value approach. And so a lot of the feedback we got was increase the evaluation criteria, increase the scoring on the technical side of things, rather than the price. So that was really good feedback to have. We do tailor the procurement in Georgia to the project, or tailor the project to the procurement, where we've done some projects that are 50-50, 50 technical and 50 price, which is pretty unusual in terms of other states. Usually, like Virginia, I know they're almost always 35 technical, 65. So we hear that. So it has to be the right project, but we will consider going higher on the technical side of things on other future projects. Costing plan and RIT efficiencies is something we work a lot on. Some of the feedback we got was that they value costing plans, but on some projects, we go further in costing plans than other states. So we might go to a 90% costing plan, and in those situations, you see less opportunity for innovation on the design build firms. So the feedback we got was consider reducing the level of costing plan development so that it gives the industry more opportunity for innovation and more savings, more tailoring it to their, what they want to do. ways to increase DBE participation in smaller contracts. I do still see us continuing with smaller design build projects, like a bridge project or bridge bundle project, $10 million bridge project is something we're going to keep doing. That's a good way to do like all qualified contractors and a good way to get the smaller contractors interested in doing design build. We do want to continue that in Georgia. And then teamwork and greater collaboration. We rolled out partnering on our design build projects pretty recently. We do partnering on all of our design build projects. But it was good to see that they value partnering too, where you're able to bring the teams together to make sure that everybody knows we have one goal in mind to deliver the project. So that was really good feedback. Less complicated technical provisions and management plans. I hear this a lot about onerous management plans on smaller DB projects. I heard that on the ITS project we recently did and other that design build, you don't need the level of management plans that you do on design build finance. So we value that feedback, and actually I am working on the contract right now, longer term. So there's some smaller focused items that I can do on the contract that I am working on actively, but I think looking holistically about making a smaller, more efficient contract is a more longer term goal that would be more in the 2025 realm to get all of the changes addressed. More efficient DB contracts. It's been a development strategy for a long time to, we used to go, I don't know if y'all worked in DB as long as I have, we used to do a 999 spec, which was basically GDOT specs plus this 20-page 999 document. We've developed a long way since then. We went to a tailored design build contract, but the point is the design build contract has kind of grown and grown and grown, that I've heard of feedback a lot. So a lot of the feedback we got was related to being more efficient and more compact with the design build contracts. That is something that I think would take longer time, but it is the goal for our division to look into. And then upcoming opportunities. So I mentioned the 400 Express Lane and the I-285 West Interchange project. Those are the DBF projects that are really hopefully awarded in August, selected in August and then awarded later this year. Broadband OMC I touched on, NEVI that Christina will touch on, and then I-75 CVL is the next MMIP project that is still in the works to be delivered. We're working on the environmental document now, and then you can see letting in Q3 of 2026. The top end, again, those are behemoth projects. We've actually done a lot of industry outreach recently on those projects to see how to deliver. A lot of the nationwide feedback we hear recently on P3 projects is they've gotten too big almost. When you talk about $4 or $5 or $6 billion projects, it gets too much risk for one entity to take on. So we've done a lot of industry outreach to try and get the size of the project right for the contractors to be able to deliver. So a lot of those conversations are being had now, in addition to actually we just had PIOHs last week on all of top end. I don't know if anybody across the top end, they did PIOHs. The other projects that we're talking about is the managed lane implementation plan was something that the department did in 2010 or 2011 in MLIP. And in the MLIP, there's a lot of other projects listed in there, not in the MMIP. Express lanes on I-20, east and west of town. There's a GAP project in Henry County to get from 675 to 285. And then the one that I like on my way down here is maybe doing Henry County both directions. I think that's very, very needed because every time I come south, the managed lanes are going north and vice versa. So inlet, I think those are really projects that would lend themselves well to design build as well. And then talking about design build itself, a little smaller projects, but I say smaller, but again, the 316s are $100 million each. So those are really exciting projects, and that's what design build, I think, can really do well for. We're trying to grade separate all of 316 from Lawrenceville to Athens, and design build is just a piece of that. We have 7 intersections that are going to be grade separated, and we already let one, and then we have 2 more contracts later this year. And then ITS, DMS Phase 3, I touched on Phase 1 and 2, we're 75 and 16, so that'll be out next year. I-75 at Bethlehem Road and the State Route 42 project are pretty close to the commercial vehicles lanes. Those are Henry County. Bethlehem Road is a new interchange. And then Darien River Bridge is actually down this way. I almost stopped on the way down here. Doing a higher level bridge for Darien, State Route 25. I think that was it, CVL ITS project. So that was the presentation. I'll turn it over to Christina now.
Thank you, Andrew. Cold questions, right? Huh? Cold questions.
Yeah, we're going to hold questions until the end, if that's all right with everybody. Our next speaker will be someone who looks familiar for today. It's Christina, not Dolores Barry. Christina has served at the Georgia Department of Transportation for 11 years and is currently the Assistant State Traffic Engineer. She manages GDOT's active traffic management components for Georgia's freeways, including TMC operations and the ITS infrastructure. She previously served as the District 6 Traffic Engineer, just as said earlier. She graduated from the Georgia Tech, the Institute, and received a bachelor's and master's degree in civil engineering. Christina.
All right. So like Andrew said, I will be presenting on Georgia's National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Deployment Program. This just goes through the agenda that we're going to talk about. We'll just give an overview of the program. We will talk about our contracting approach. We have 2 rounds of procurement that we've done so far or that we're working on, so I'll talk about those, and then we'll talk about some project resources that you can access for round 2. So how many people in here actually drive an electric vehicle? That's actually really, really good, because usually when I ask that question, it's like 2, maybe. So cool. Maybe you guys will get some information that'll be helpful for you. So how many people in here have ever driven one or have been a passenger in an electric vehicle? Awesome. So that's a lot more. All right. And then one more question. So how many people would consider purchasing an electric vehicle or purchase one sooner if charging stations are more accessible? Cool. Well, then this presentation is for you. All right. So the NEVI program was created through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which was signed into law in November of 2021. The purpose of the program is to create a nationwide network of 500,000 EV chargers by the year 2030. The program has several goals, mainly just to accelerate the equitable adoption of EVs, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and encourage the U.S. to lead global electrification. As far as the funding, so it's a 5-year program. It had $5 billion in funding, and Georgia's apportionment of that funding is $135 million. So to be eligible to receive the funding, all the states had to develop a NEVI plan, and so GDOT developed a NEVI plan, and then it's been updated a couple times, and it'll be updated again. And it just has to be compliant with the federal requirements and approved by the joint office. And just generally to talk about some of the requirements of NEVI and what you might can expect, there are some requirements. So with this program, we are building DC, FC, high-powered fast chargers. So it's at least 150 kilowatts. And just for anybody that might not be familiar, so this shows the type of charging that you could use with an electric vehicle. The first one is just level 1, so that's just like a regular outlet that you would have in your house. Level 2 charging, it charges a little bit faster, so like 4 to 10 hours. See, might be something that you would charge your car overnight. It's more similar to like the hookup that your dryer or your oven might have. But what we're building under NEVI is the DC fast charging, and you see that in the green box. There's several different types of connectors that can be used with the DC fast charging. For NEVI, it's required to have the non-proprietary CCS connector. The next connector is also the Tesla connector. So they're required to have CCS. There is a possibility that some of the stations, may decide to provide more than one type of charger, so you may see that, but they will all have CCS connectors. So just to go through some more of the requirements. For the projects themselves, so it's an 80-20 split federal funding. So the federal funding covers 80% of the project, and then the developer covers the rest of the cost of the project. the chargers are required to have a 97% uptime, and they have to be available 24/7. So essentially, when people stop to charge, we want them to be able to charge. We don't want a situation in which you stop at the charger and it's, a convenient location and it's along your route, but it's broken. That wouldn't do any good. So there's requirements for availability. As far as location, they have to be located every 50 miles along an AFC, and they have to be located less than a mile from the corridor. And so I'll show you a map of the AFCs a little bit later in this presentation, but for the purposes of Georgia, it's mainly interstates and then a few state routes. And then, if you're traveling along that route, you don't have to drive 5 miles to charge your car, so it'll be within a mile of the corridor. And I've gotten some questions previously. There are some other requirements for location. So like if at the end of a corridor, you have to have a charger located within 25 miles of the end of a corridor. And so if the end of the corridor is in your state, it's got to be within 25 miles of that. If it crosses state lines, then it needs to be within 25 miles of the border if the adjacent state does not have that same AFC. And if they do, then you just have to meet the 50 miles between the charger and your state versus the next state. And so that has actually made a little bit of a difference to us because we had to increase the number of chargers that we were going to build with round 2 just to make sure that we were meeting all those requirements. They also have quarterly and annual data reporting requirements. I'll talk a little bit about those. They have to comply with the American with Disabilities Act, and then in collaboration with agency partners and stakeholders. Another thing to point out that's not actually on this slide, there's a requirement that the charging stations do not require a subscription. So when you stop to actually charge your car, you need to be able to pay for it without getting a subscription. So, using a credit card or cash or whatever. And so that's something that you'll see as well with these charging stations. For the data requirements, so they will be submitting data to GDOT, to the federal government, and then they will be making data available to third parties. So the data going to the feds is going to be submitted to something called EV Chart, which was launched in February of 2024. And the data submission is broken into several different submission deadlines. So we have one-time submission, annual submission. So the EV Chart was the data input template was originally released in May of 2023 and then later updated. And the system-to-system submittal method is under development and anticipated to be available summer of 2024. So they will submit to us. So the first time they'll submit to us, the one-time data is their services commencement. They'll submit data, and then annual. And then I also mentioned that they have to do third-party data sharing, just making the data available. So that'll be an API to share data that has to be maintained during the operating period. I think I didn't mention it before, but the operating period for these stations is agreeing to, operate and maintain the station for at least 5 years. And then when we reach the 5 years, they can either decide to decommission the station or they can continue the operations of it. So each state was required to develop a NEVI plan. So this slide shows a picture of GDOT's NEVI plan. It was originally constructed in September of 2022 last year, and then we are working through an update now. It's laid out in different sections, such as stakeholder engagement, vision and goals, EV charging infrastructure deployment, equity, cybersecurity. And the full plan can be found on the GDOT NEVI website. So these are our goals for implementation of our charging stations. First and foremost, we're getting federal funds for these, so we want to make sure that we're in compliance with federal requirements. And as part of this, we will develop 100% of the interstate and AFC corridors to program standards. We want customer-driven deployment, so we want the charging to be convenient and where people actually want to charge. We want to maximize economic development so that they're placed in good places to optimize that. We want private sector ownership and operation. GDOT is not in the business of operating electric vehicle chargers, and so that's really important. And then also sustainability and reliability of operations. So as Andrew kind of alluded to, this is a design build finance, operate, maintain project. The developer is going to provide the 20% match. They will operate and maintain the station for at least 5 years after commencement. So moving into a little bit more of the Georgia-specific information. So this shows a map of our alternative fuel corridors and existing infrastructure. The kind of green or cyan color is where we currently have NEVI compliant chargers, and then the yellow shows the gaps. In this particular map, we have 5 stations that were part of round 1. And since those best value developers have selected, those are being shown as covered in this map, but they're actually under development. But this shows all of our alternative fuel corridors. Currently, we have 1,978 miles of AFCs. There's 162 publicly available fast charging stations. 93 of those are within 1 mile of an AFC, but only 14 are NEVI compliant. And if you remember the slide that detailed that you need to have at least 4 chargers, they have to be at least 150 kilowatts. And so that's why you see such a discrepancy between the number of fast charging stations that we have, the number that we have within 1 mile of an AFC, and then the ones that are actually NEVI compliant, because you may see, they may be fast chargers, but maybe they're not 150 kilowatts, or maybe there's not 4 of them, or, just various things that make those charging stations not necessarily compliant. So we do have quite a few gaps that we need to fill with the NEVI program, and so that's what we're working on. Additionally, there are also 42 Tesla-only supercharger sites, but again, to be NEVI compliant, you have to have CCS connectors, and so if it's a Tesla-only supercharger site, it would not be considered NEVI compliant. So this map shows our round 1 locations. I don't know if you can see it, but the round 1 locations are circled in kind of the pink color. We have Tifton, Fort Valley, Dublin, Metter, and Brunswick. And so those are the ones that we selected in our round 1. And locations across the AFCs, we looked at different things, traffic as a proxy for potential charger utilizations, connections to major cross highways, tourist destinations along the route, is this somewhere that people already stop, existing real estate around the interchanges. And then another thing that we looked at, when we looked at the proposals that we got is amenities, including planned and existing additions. So, did they have Wi-Fi? Were there places within walking distance? Were there restrooms? And different things like that played into the selection process. So for round 1, we have selected the 5 best value proposers. You can see them on the site. EnviroSpark has a location in Tifton and Metter, and then we have Francis Energy in Fort Valley, Silver Comet in Dublin, and then Love's Travel Stop and Country Stores, which is in Brunswick. And I'll just run through real quick. These are the different locations. So in Tifton, it'll be at a Waffle House. A canopy was another thing that we looked at as a potential amenity. There is not a canopy that's proposed here. And then you can also see on the map next to the aerial image, there were 3 other sites that were proposed in Tifton, but the yellow shows what the selected site was. Similarly, this is the Fort Valley location. It'll be at a Wendy's. There's no canopy proposed, but the proposer did note that a solar canopy could be installed in the future, and so there might be a future upgrade, or there could be. This will be at a racetrack in Dublin, Silver Comet. They actually are proposing a canopy, and you can see that in their site layout. Unfortunately, it's upside down, but you can kind of imagine what that would look like. And I've seen those at racetracks, so you may have, just, traveling around, you may have already seen a canopy or something that looks like that, but that'll be our Dublin site. The other EnviroSpark site is in Metter, Georgia. It'll be at the Shell Superstop gas station, so you can stop there and charge your electric vehicle on your way to summer seminar. And then this is the Love's Travel Stop and Country Stores, which is in Brunswick. And so right now we are in our round 2 procurement. We just released an RFP for that, and it's currently and procurement utilizing Bid Express. If you want to look at the project information, so you can use the QR codes. We recorded an industry forum earlier this year, and so you can take a look at that. And then next to that QR code is a QR code that shows round 2 info. So round 2 identified 33 locations, so it's a lot bigger than round 1. But round 1 was really our first, kind of let's learn some lessons, because at GDOT, we've never done a project like this. We've never built electric vehicle chargers. And so it was really helpful, I feel like, to get some lessons learned under our belt before we went for the 33 charging locations. But this is essentially going to build out the rest of our AFCs as they stand now. And so once we're done with that, we'll still have NEVI funds available. So, it's potential that we could go off the AFCs, or, they do have, FHWA does rounds of nominations for AFCs. So, there is the potential that, there could be more AFCs at some point in the future. We don't really know at this point. But at this point, round 2 will finish out the build of our AFCs. We do have a mapping tool that you can look at if you want to see all the gaps that we're filling. You can use the QR code to take a look at it. It's interactive, so there's a lot of information there. This is what the map looks like if you just bring it up. You can kind of see in this map there's little blobs. This is a bigger picture of the blobs, and so that's showing you what the locations are, what the gaps are. And that's kind of a big overview of it, but if you zoom in closer, it actually shows you a polygon, and that polygon encompasses every area that's within 1 mile of the AFC. And you'll notice if you go to the mapping tool, some of the locations have more than 1 polygon, some of them might only have 1, and it just kind of depends what met the distance requirement for the 50 miles, and then also what was available, and then what met the 1 mile from the AFC requirement. This is our procurement schedule for round 2. So we issue the RFP in July 1st of 2024. And so we're looking forward. The proposers can request a one-on-one meeting. That's shown. The proposal due date is September 30th of 2024. And then we'll have a public comment period, which will be December of 2024. And then we're looking towards the anticipated selection of the apparent best value proposer in February of 2025, with hopefully the agreements being executed around middle of June 2025. And of course, with this project, we couldn't do it alone. So this shows our project management team. So in addition to GDOT, we also have HNTV helping us out a lot. We have EY and JLL. We have our legal advisors, or Ashurst and McGuire Woods, and then an insurance advisor, Ames and Gow. And so we really appreciate their help and support on this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. All right, so I'm just going to pick someone random out of the crowd to give this next. Oh, Mark Herman's here. All right, Mark. Okay. Mark has been with Kimley Traffic Experience in Richmond, Virginia. He's largely focused on strategic safety planning and traffic or safety-related analysis for public agencies. He's actively involved in ITE and currently serves the Secretary-Treasurer for the Southern District. He's a graduate of Virginia Tech, and he's also from Boston, so anybody who's been a Falcons fan longer than 7 years would have a heated conversation with him.
Hey everybody. So I guess first question out of the way, what is someone from Richmond doing down here in Georgia? So he mentioned I'm currently the Secretary Treasurer for the Southern District ITE Board. And so we have been doing this initiative over the past couple of years where we've been encouraging people on the Southern District Board to attend sections outside of their own so they can learn a little bit, bring back to the district, but also bring back to their home section. So kind of getting a little tour of summer seminar, so thank you for having me. Also, this session is related to policy. My presentation is not about policy. I got asked, hey, can you talk about something in Virginia? And originally thought, okay, well, maybe I can talk about a few different programs that VDOT's working on that maybe that could be interesting and, do a little highlights. Ran out of time, so instead you got a presentation that I gave a month ago at our big site meeting. So how many improvements does it take to fix short pump? So first off, what is short pump? It is an area in Henrico County, which is just outside of Richmond. Actually, the county surrounds Richmond to the east, west, and north. And short pump is a very, very commercial area, and by far has the most traffic issues, most congestion in the Richmond area. Probably not going to compare to what you might see in Atlanta, but for Richmond, which is a fairly small city, to have this much of a issue just outside of it is pretty problematic. One thing that is interesting about short pump, and to Henrico County's dismay a little bit, is that it has been studied again and again and again, and there have been fixes, small improvements that have been identified, but nothing to really address the heart of some of the issues. So I wanted to, before I get started, outline some of the other studies that had been completed in the area. And to kind of give an outline of what is happening in this area too. So you have I-64 running east to west throughout the area. I-295 running north-south. So I-295 is a bypass route around Richmond. And then Route 288, which while not an interstate, is a freeway that essentially acts as the fourth leg of I-295. But Route 288 and I-295 don't connect. And so there's a stretch of 64 that's connecting those two other major freeways. And of course, 64 is carrying plenty of traffic itself. So a lot of focus has been placed on the arterial, so on US 250 throughout the short pump area, which is serving all of the businesses that I had listed on the previous slide. But there hasn't really been a study in recent years that had really identified fixes to some of the problems that were happening on the interstate. So that became our focus for this study. Now this part, kind of par for the course for a lot of studies. What was our goal? We wanted to improve safety at the hot spots, reduce recurring congestion, and then address some of the capacity constrained roadways in the area. One of the things that was interesting about this area is what was happening from a safety perspective. So within 5 years in the short pump area, there were almost 1,900 crashes, including 7 fatal crashes and almost 500 injury crashes. We also had some data from the police department that there were 9,500 calls for service in this same area. So even plenty of instances that did not show up in crash data, likely due to a dollar threshold. VDOT every year releases a network screening for the entire state that identifies intersections and segments that are ranked highly for potential for safety improvement and should be evaluated as some part of safety project. All of those analyses or those intersections and segments are then ranked within each district. So Virginia is split into 9 districts, and short pump had the highest ranked intersection in Richmond District, also the 9th highest ranked intersection, and then it had 8 segments that totaled 2 miles in the top 10. And to put that into perspective, Richmond District is, I believe, the largest district in Virginia, and there were just shy of 10,000 miles of roadways that were analyzed as part of this network screening. And 2 of the top 10 in the whole district were right in this area. A little bit more specifically about what's happening. So on I-64, so this is on westbound I-64 approaching the interchange with US 250. So if you're taking this, what we'll refer to as the westbound to westbound loop ramp to access short pump and to access all of these businesses, there was a pattern of rear end crashes 155 crashes over 5 years approaching that loop ramp. Part of it was due to just the amount of traffic trying to access the area. Part of it was that there was a fairly short weave within the cloverleaf range. But one thing that was interesting, and I'll circle back to this a little bit later, is the timing of these crashes and how densely grouped in the PM peak hour they occurred, much more so than what you would see on average. So in our existing operations analysis, we modeled the entire area, so including both 3 freeways, so Route 288, I-64, I-295, plus the entirety of US 250 in between. And there were a couple major issues today that were all centered towards the eastern half of our study area. Most notably being that Q centered on that westbound 64 to westbound US 250 loop ramp. When we projected that into the future, all of the existing issues just became worse, as you would expect with traffic growth. But then the western half of the study corridor then also had some issues start to pop up in our future years. So the title of this is How Many Improvements Does It Take to Fix Short Pump? Well, let me walk you through what we considered, first of all. Starting with 3 improvements that had been identified in some of those previous studies that had been done, but hadn't yet been funded or constructed. So we wanted to include them as part of our efforts. So that was adding auxiliary lanes on Route 288. Part of that was then making necessary improvements on US 250 towards that western half of the corridor. And then also installing a through cut, which is an innovative intersection design that has become pretty popular in Virginia near that interchange with US 250. So that was the start. We had those efforts pretty much worked through already. We then wanted to really focus on the interchange where we had that safety and congestion issue. So we considered a few different options for innovative interchanges, and we ended up looking at a few different ways of removing that weave and converting this to a partial cloverleaf. However, what we noticed, once we were able to free up congestion there and reduce some of that queuing, it just pushes the bottleneck downstream. So then we add in some improvements on I-295, another improvement on the arterial, now that we have volume flowing a little bit better. Add in a few more options. So VDOT and FHWA involved in the project really wanted us to look at options for CD roads. And then we also looked at ways to handle capacity issues on I-295, accessing 64 with a 2-lane ramp. And then a more minor improvement, but just restriping to add a choice lane on I-64. And what I can tell you from this, it's a fairly long list of improvements that we were considering, and these are after we ruled out some improvements earlier on. But I can tell you that it really became a scoping nightmare. For anyone trying to scope projects, we had to look at improvement A. Well, what happens about A plus B, and then A plus B plus C, and then what if we do just A and C together and take out B? So the amount of iterations that we had to run through with the analysis was pretty extensive. And one of the things that Henrico County was very interested in, and this is something that has been in their comprehensive plan for a number of years, was they wanted to look at a new interchange. The challenge with this is they were interested in putting a new interchange in between I-64 interchange with Route 288, which is a freeway-to-freeway interchange, and the I-64 interchange with I-295. So you've got these 2 major freeway-to-freeway or system-to-system interchanges, and they wanted to put one in the middle. The spacing was actually okay, but from VDOT's perspective and FHWA's perspective, their biggest worry was, well, can you do this without disrupting that flow from 288 to 295? And then our question to Henrico County is, sure, we could look at this, but we're also looking at all of these other improvements. where's the value and how much, how many additional combinations of this new interchange plus these other improvements do we have to consider to be able to tell this story? So I'm going to focus on these two major improvements that we were evaluating, the partial clover leaf and then this new interchange for the rest of my presentation. I'll circle back to the big picture at the end. So first, again, we looked at a few different options for this partial clover leaf. The main motivation here was removing that weave on I-64 to try to help reduce the number of crashes that are occurring, and to just be able to push more vehicles through on I-64. So we removed the ramp from eastbound 250 to westbound 64 and instead added a signal with left turns. When we first looked at that with a traditional partial cloverleaf design, we noticed that we then had queuing issues that were created on US 250 due to the new signal. So one of the changes that we made was to implement a contraflow left turn interchange. So if you look in the middle of this diagram, not quite like a DDI where you don't sing, but just the left turns are crossing, and what it did was it allowed us to have more storage in the left turn lane for those vehicles accessing the new signal and turning left, where we were able to alleviate some queuing issues on US 250. And now if I go back to the potential new interchange at North Gayton, one of the biggest motivating factors for considering this interchange was that it had potential to reroute volume away from the most capacity constrained roadways or ramps in the area. So what we have shown is the projected change in our peak hour volumes. And so I'll start with that loop ramp that is the kind of basis for our study. In 2046, if we were to implement this new interchange, because it provided new access to Short Pump area, it was projected to take away 600 vehicles from that loop ramp that was over capacity. We were also able to take a lot of volume off of US 250 itself, which had its own safety and congestion related issues. So the goal here was to make sure, okay, well, we know we're adding a new access point. The goal is to make sure that this area of in between these three major interchanges can still operate efficiently on I-64, and can we mitigate any potential increases in congestion in that area so that we can see the benefit of reduced volume on these other roadways. I mentioned earlier that VDOT and Federal Highway were very interested in seeing concepts related to CD roads. So with the new interchange, the question was also, well, how does this fit in, and can it be a system of CD roads? So we looked at that, and I will tell you what the concept we have shown here was the least desirable concept from VDOT and FHWA, and this was our smallest CD road concept, where we were carrying 3 or 4 lanes throughout the CD road in order to accommodate the traffic, because the traffic going from Route 288 to I-295, or through either of those interchanges regardless, was on the CD road. This created some issues related to the access in and out, based off of the number of ingress and egress points that we had to the CD road. And the option that we looked at on the other side, we actually needed 5 lanes on the CD road at one point to accommodate the amount of traffic that it would be serving. One of the things that, after a couple of redesigns of the CD road, we were able to determine that the CD road could operate as efficiently as the other option we were looking at was just auxiliary lanes connecting the 2 existing interchanges to our proposed interchange. And both operated fairly well and did not have any degradation in speed compared to our existing scenario. But because our improvements weren't addressing all capacity issues within the area, we did a little bit of sensitivity testing and identified that the CD road was more likely to break down in future years if other issues were to be resolved outside of what we were addressing as part of our study. Where the auxiliary lanes, they were a little bit better suited to handle bottlenecks being released elsewhere. So one question was, for this new interchange was how do we, connect this new interchange to the two major interchanges on either side? And the other was what interchange alternative do we use where we can, Henrico's main goal was they wanted to maintain the existing bridge. So what we had come up with was a DDI at North Gaten Road with those auxiliary lanes connecting this interchange again to the major interchanges on either side. So to kind of wrap this all up and put this in a way that we could effectively compare these, various alternatives that we were looking at across the board, we ended up developing what we were calling build packages. So 3 build packages, where the major difference, so build package 1 included our cloverleaf at US 250. Build package 2 included the new interchange at North Gaten Road. And then build package 3 was both major improvements. And then the other, I say minor, but when I show you costs in a little bit, the minor ones really aren't so minor either. But the other improvements were included in all 3 build packages with the exception of one, which was that restriping for the choice lane, which was not needed once we added the new interchange and auxiliary lanes. So what did this do to the area? So our build packages, all 3 were projected to reduce travel time on westbound 64 in the 2046 PM peak hour by over 15 minutes from our no-build scenario. All had, vast improvements in no-build, so there was plenty of utility going on. But what we did find was that build packages 2 and 3, which were the 2 that included the new interchange, because so many more vehicles were now through vehicles at that interchange with I-60 or with US 250, as opposed to exiting and being in that weave, that it improved travel time even more. And to put a picture to that, so our queues that were projected on I-64. So what was in the existing scenario queue grew to 5 miles in our no-build scenario. This wasn't completely isolated to this interchange because, of course, then it was passing, I think it was 2 or 3 other interchanges where it was kind of being an additive queue at that point. But with our build packages, we took that 5-mile queue and we reduced it down to below 1,000 feet, so better than our existing scenario. And now what will kind of be the only real technical part of the presentation is our biggest challenge with this was trying to document the potential benefits to safety. And I don't know who here has worked on predictive analyses with highway safety manual-based methods. I will be the first to tell you I cannot wait for the new version of the highway safety manual because every project that I've ever worked on using predictive methods for the interstates, there's always some limitation where it can't analyze truly the scenario that you are working on. But our goal here, specifically with the packages that included that new interchange, were to identify what the potential increase in crashes that would be predicted due to the fact that you now have new signals, new ramps, and new auxiliary lanes connected to this interchange. You're introducing a new conflict point, with that comes crashes. We needed to compare that to the potential crash reductions we would see elsewhere in the network, since we are removing volume from some of those overcapacity roadways. Now, the issue that we were using, that we were running into, we were using ISAT-E, which is the Enhanced Interchange Safety Analysis tool. It does not accurately predict the number of congestion-related crashes that we were seeing at the US 250 interchange. And you might say, okay, well, you just need to calibrate the model. The problem was, elsewhere in our study network, if you took away this 3,000 feet where we had this existing crash problem, the tool was predicting crashes within 12% of our existing crash history everywhere else in our study network. So it was actually doing fairly well, except for this area where we had this congestion-related crash problem, where it was predicting almost 80% fewer crashes than what we were seeing in the field. Also, when we plugged in our build models, it not only was way under predicting, but it predicted that there would be an increase in crashes when we constructed the partial cloverleaf or rerouted some of these vehicles, which was pretty contrary to what we would expect when we have a clear pattern of rear-end crashes caused by congestion in the PM peak hour. And if we remove that, well, how are we now increasing crashes? And to put a little bit of context to those crashes too, I think it was something like 90% rear-end crashes over 5 years. Almost 60% of them occurred from 3 to 7 p.m., which was about 15 to 20% higher than the average urban interstate in Virginia. And it was close to just about a quarter of the crashes happened in 1 hour between 5 and 6 p.m. Again, the average urban interstate in Virginia, 5 to 6 p.m. would have 9% of total crashes. So we were way overrepresented at 25%. And then every single crash that occurred in those 5 years between 5 and 6 p.m. was a rear end. So something we could clearly attribute to this queuing that we observed. So given that we had some issues with our methodology, we had to come up with some alternative approaches. So we ended up developing for crash reductions and kind of developing custom CMFs to try to understand how many crashes we could potentially reduce. The low range, and this is an approach which is, I will say, not a perfect approach, but is one that the state has started to adopt for Smart Scale, which, if anyone is familiar, Smart Scale is a program in Virginia that is used to fund transportation projects, and it goes through a scoring process where every other year there are somewhere between 300 and 500 applications that get submitted, and they get scored based on a number of factors, safety and potential reduction in crashes being one of them. So given that that process has to score 300 to 500 projects in a short time frame, it has some base assumptions that are built in on how to estimate the crash reduction. So this low range CMF option was one that was similar to something that would be used in Smart Scale, where we look at the potential change in volume based off of an improvement and tie that to a potential change in crashes. So very simply put, if you remove 10% of your vehicles, you can assume a 10% reduction in crashes as well. Now, our high range option, we instead took more of an approach based off of our judgment, where we looked at the pattern of crashes. We knew they were all rear ends, but we dug in even more specifically to figure out how many of those rear end crashes in the crash description did it specifically mention there was a queue or there were stopped vehicles on I-64 that contributed to the crash. And what we had found was that it wasn't all, largely because it's free text. You're always going to have some variation. But we wanted to see how many of those crashes and assume that a certain percentage of those could be mitigated if we could remove the queue. So overall summary, we knew with the new interchange that we were likely to see an increase in crashes on 64 in the vicinity of the new interchange. But we were able to balance that out with reductions in crashes on US 250 due to a lot of volume being rerouted to the interstate, and reductions at that US 250 interchange due to our reduction in congestion. So how much money does it take to fix short pump? Right now, it's looking at $305 million in 2022 dollars. So Henrico County has got their work cut out for them to try to fund all of these improvements. They have made some progress already. So kind of an update as to where things stand now. The new interchange and the partial clove relief at US 250 both were included in our preferred alternative and approved by VDOT and Federal Highway. So those are both taking the next step of undergoing a NEPA study. Henrico has already acquired almost $65 million in funding from Central Virginia Transportation Authority, $60 million in local funding, and $23 million in previously funded smart scale projects, so some of the ones that were identified and still included in our recommendations. And they have a few grant applications that are out there today trying to acquire the rest of the money. With that, thank you.
All right, so we have a little bit of time for some questions for either of our speakers. Anyone?
Hey, I'm Sumit Mohan from Mercedes, and you're taking for it. Could you give us a little more background? I know you mentioned about the CMGC, CDA, and this reorientation from conventional P3 to these new models. What went behind was the process?
About how to or where to use those delivery methods. I mean, the industry's looking at design build, and design build has been successful, but I think there's other ways that projects are being delivered across the country. I don't know if everybody's familiar in this room with progressive design build, but that's certainly another methodology that we're looking at using is progressive design build. But CMGC really lends itself to, I mentioned in the presentation about unique projects where you have to have the contractor and the consultant together working together for a solution. I really like it in the way we're using it. One thing that I didn't touch on for the Savannah River Bridge specifically is you're able to have the cable supplier in the room with the designer. If you did that via design bid build, you wouldn't be able to have the cable supplier working on the design and tailoring that design to the cable manufacturer. So that's been a really good thing that we've been able to use via CMGC. Now, how it's used in the future is, we look at projects and try and fit the best procurement to the project and just, try and decide what the right methodology is. Again, I mentioned that we're not going to be able to use CMGC or the other two very often, but I mentioned progressive design build. Comprehensive development agreement, if you read the legislation, is pretty similar to progressive design build, so we're kind of looking at and maybe using that on bigger projects. The ACM delivery too, I'll mention that it's either it has to follow the design build procurement methodology if you don't have financing, or it follows the P3 model if you do have financing. So CMGC, we're able to do it without financing, so we follow the design build process. I think if you did the comprehensive development agreement award methodology, those are probably bigger projects that you do have to follow the P3 methodology on. Does that answer your question, I think? Okay.
Any other questions? No? Okay. A couple announcements. Jared made me mention that the PDHs are in the back. The AICP sign-up sheets are back there as well. Is that correct? And then also, probably most important, the schedule. The schedule in the pamphlet had a little bit of a snafu on it. So if you check the insert as far as at least the starting time for tomorrow's first session, it's 8:30, not 8 o'clock. So you're welcome. Thank you very much for Andrew, Mark, and Christina.
Yeah.